right, so while we're getting logged on, I have a slide up for you guys just to get you started. While we're getting logged on, go to the chat box. And if you could answer, if a student wanted to take your class, but they said they could only access your class via cell phone, no computer, no tablet, would you let them take the class? Yes or no, and give a reason. And if you are a virtual learner logging in later, you can go to this tinyurl.com/DustyCH4, or I will put that link in the chat box for you. All right, so we'll talk today about education and ICT. Today's session, what you need is a web-connected device, which I think you all have, with a laptop or a tablet or a phone that has speakers, and about 10 to 15 minutes. And for virtual learners, you'll need access to the Zoom webinar, which we'll link later. So just a quick quality check. If you guys would look and see if you can see the red record button, I'll ask you to raise your hand. And if you can hear me speaking, raise your hand. All three of you, thanks very much. You can lower your hands. And then we just have about 10 to 15 minutes. So for as much as you can, reduce distractions, great. If you're virtual, you can just pause and come back when the distractions are over. All right, so we'll get started. So just kind of to begin with, what's the big idea? We are talking about chapter 4 today. We're talking about education and ICT. Garrison talks about that as information and communication technology. All right, so the real question for us is, how can we as educators and as students, how can we use evolving technology, information technology and communication technology to foster critical and collaborative learning? All right, just to restate that, what we're talking about is using information technology and communication technology and how we evaluate how they reshape education and how we can use that to foster critical and collaborative thinking for us and for our students. So we're going to be describing hopefully some changes in technology and education, and we'll describe the potential impacts of technology on learning. So I asked you before to answer the cell phone, yes or no. Dave, you have during COVID, but not during non-COVID. Don, yes, but you'll hold them to the same requirements. And same for you, Joe. Okay, good. All right.
For everything. I've had to choose our class Zoom via cell phone. So yeah, that would be judgment. That wouldn't be nice.
I had a couple of classes this last semester where I had students who did get COVID. And so I thankfully was in a classroom that was set up with complete technology. Like it had the cameras that moved, as the speaker moved. So it was actually really a lot easier than I thought it would be. But cell phone technology, I think would be, unless they were pretty advanced, a little more difficult. And so, all right, good. We will move forward. All right, again, today we're looking at chapter 4, which you guys have read, and we're talking about exploring that impact, the impact that changing information and communication technology has on particularly distance education as well as campus-based education. And so let me put this link in the chat for you guys. Have you all used Padlet before? It's kind of fun.
I haven't.
Yeah. So Padlet is just it's just like an interactive bulletin board. So you'll be able to click on the link. I've just put it in the chat for you. And what I'll ask you to do is go there and answer the prompt. What was the first technology that you remember using in your learning experience? And virtual learners, you can use that link and you'll be able to access that later. That link will stay live. So we'll take just a minute to do that. All right. So while you're typing, if you're not familiar with Padlet, you can create these boards, you can decorate them how you want, you can put a prompt, and then students can come here and post. So right here, if you have students who've logged in, it'll show their names, because yours, it says anonymous. So we've got laptop, let's see, a desktop computer, a cool James Bond style watch with a calculator. Nice. We had the very first thing I remember is we did have a computer in my 4th grade classroom. It was huge, and only, of course, one person could use it at a time. And we had gigantic floppy disk. Oh, a Commodore 64. That's awesome. Okay, so you can go. You can close that tab out, and we'll head back to our slides. All right, so some good stuff in there. So just to get a little bit of perspective on technology and education, and I feel like that's really what this chapter was about, was really just kind of giving us a perspective of where it's come from, where technology has come from, and how that's influenced education. So just so that we have a sense of it, the Vocational Education Act of 1963 is the first act that really started funding the use of technology in schools. It's the first significant introduction of technology into classrooms since 1890. And at that time, 1890, that was the first time that chalkboards were introduced. So prior to this 1960s act, chalkboards. That was really it. And so once we started getting this technology, teachers were routinely using computers to assign tasks to students that were basically skill and drill. So it was just knowledge and recall kinds of things. By the mid 1980s, a lot of software was coming out, ed tech software, and students were just answering endless questions based on knowledge and recall, knowledge and recall. And then a decade later, we get the 1990s. Not only did we get Seinfeld, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Friends, we also got the internet, and we were connected to the internet with worldwide computers. And so many of us saw something like this. But there was this huge growth in the World Wide Web. We got email, we got video, we got all kinds of digital media. And then the big one for education is that we got two-way communication between anyone, anywhere, anytime. And that was the first real steps that we were seeing in the distance education. We had correspondence education through the mail before, but this was our first real step into actual distance education. So we'll do a quick poll, just a quick poll for you guys. If you could answer a couple of questions. Have you taken an online distance class before? Yes or no? I know the answer to that one for everyone here. Have you taken an asynchronous online class before? Yes or no? And a synchronous online class. And a hybrid class. Everyone has taken an online class. 2 out of 3 of us, or two of the 3 of you have taken an asynchronous class, and all 3 of you a synchronous one, 2 out of 3 a hybrid class. But just out of curiosity, who has not taken an asynchronous class?
As far as I can recall, I have not.
Okay. Nice. Is that, but would you, or I mean, like, are you opposed to it, or just
I
just haven't had the opportunity yet? Okay. Interesting. It's funny because before I came to Wright State, I had never done synchronous. I have only ever done asynchronous, but here was the first place that I've seen people doing synchronous classes. So it's been an interesting learning curve for me. All right, so I'll ask for the next activity for you guys to go up and use your annotation tool. So if you'll just go to the top of your screen and you'll click the annotate button, and then you'll go down to where it says text. I'm going to ask you to, using the text feature, find your icon and write what you see as the advantage to digital tech and teaching. And these are the icons that you all selected in our first week of class. So hopefully you'll remember who you were. All right, so we've got Joe, you've got student engagement. Yes. Dawn, maximizes teacher time. And Dave, easier analytics. And for virtual learners, I actually have, I'll actually go ahead and share it real quick, but I have a link for you all and I'll put it in the chat box for us, where you all will write those onto your slides. So I'll include that here now to do later. But yeah, so there's some pretty clear advantages of digital technologies. One, easier analytics. Yes, we can maximize time with engagement. The big thing is that it connects students and teachers together without restrictions. It's the capability to connect teachers with our students, and then connect our students with our teachers without any restrictions to time or space. Because this is unbundled, we can have classroom discussions, we can have classroom projects, we can do this over space and time. It doesn't matter what the distance is. Furthermore, when we have asynchronous communication, then time frames don't matter at all. So we can really slow things down as we need to. All right, a couple of things that we know with regards to what we're talking about in chapter 4 is this kind of history of technology in our education and how this is working for our classes. As distance learning becomes more popular, there's this expectation that more traditional classes were the only ways that we can engage students in critical and collaborative thinking for learning. So there was an assumption that this was only possible in these traditional classes, these traditional face-to-face settings. But there was, around this time, the 90s, 2000s, exponential growth. And so what we saw is lots and lots of students, more students enrolling in classes. So we saw teachers increasing their reliance on lecture. And so what was happening is really teachers began just teaching or really talking to students about their content, a really passive approach to learning. So researchers started comparing the difference between traditional classroom learning and then campus learning to see what's happening. And the results were kind of surprising. There's an assumption that we're talking about apples to oranges, but the research shows that when we looked at this traditional distance learning compared to campus-based learning, the results were relatively the same in terms of apples to apples. And actually, the results for the students who were in distance learning were actually a little bit better. But regardless, as educators, we want to shift from this idea that there's a passive approach to engaged or a passive approach to education. We want to move towards engaged education for thinking and learning. And one of the things that Garrison talks about or promotes this idea of how we're using ICT to do this. So you'll go back to your annotation tools, click that annotation, and this time you will draw. And here are just a list of icons and different ways that we can use information and communication technology. So I'll ask you just to circle the ICT that you've used as either a student or a teacher in teaching and learning. Virtual students, you have this slide and you can do the same thing. You can circle it on the slides. Yeah, so lots of web, online texts, video conferencing. Yeah, so actually it looks like most of these. All right, so as you read in chapter 4, there's obviously a little bit more to the story when it comes to this history of education and how education has evolved and changed with new technologies. You read about MOOCs and blended and hybrid classes, but the more important or the overarching idea to all of this, in my opinion, is that we as educators need to take is this, and we'll apply resolve. What we know is that technology has evolved and with it education, but just having technology isn't the same as being able to use, it's like Don's analogy of using the laptops just to prop up our teacher editions. It's not the same thing. It's not the same as being able to use it to create communities of inquiry or to teach critical thinking. We have to remember also that just because many of our students today are what we would call digital natives, it doesn't mean that they know how to navigate technology. So we need to make sure that we're taking time explicitly to instruct them on how to engage in technology, particularly things other than social media. And whether we're teaching using technology in a campus-based classroom or remotely, our goal still has to be to shift our focus from passively sharing information to inquiry and to engagement for our students. And that doesn't matter whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, doesn't matter whether it's face-to-face or online, okay? So just a brief discussion of the chapter. Do you guys have comments or ideas or things that you want to bring up or share? You're welcome to give critical feedback as well. If not, and even if you can, if not, I'm actually going to share with you a link for a quick Google form, just a quick assessment for you all to complete, basically just so that you can self-assess, because you'll get your results and I can assess whether or not I did what I was supposed to do and whether or not you took away from it what I thought that you would take away from it. So virtual students, you have access to this as well. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to discuss.